Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Evil. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, I think it's kind of interesting that, she's taking a bath by herself, and I think it is gotten to that point. And it ended up being something that kind of came up in season 1 during her therapy sessions, but it's like Kristen's kind of annoyance. It seemed like she was kind of annoyed with her kids just being like, yeah, but it's like, it was because they were talking about Andy coming back. And so even before he gets there, it's like, oh, he's at the door, and she's trying to get in front of the mirror, smiling like, yeah, I gotta be perfect housewife. Oh, welcoming my husband home, like type of thing. Like, it seems like she had to fake it. Like, she was actually kind of enjoying him not being around. And so, I mean, to be fair, we've seen that kind of conflict a little bit in season 1, but this is on a whole nother level. It's just kind of like, okay. And she's like, oh, hey. And you can definitely tell Cheryl notices her expressions and stuff. But what was really fascinating is when they were about to do some sexy time, and you're like, oh, this is going to be awkward, because you can tell she's kind of not into it. And the moment he lifts up her shirt and you see all those crossburns, I'm like, I'm like, when the hell did that happen? I was like, because at first I thought, my initial thought was, oh, she keeps testing out like the crosses on like different parts of her body and being like, am I, whether she hasn't really talked about, I thought it was going to be a thing of, no, I need to see if like I'm evil or not. But then she like covers up. She's like, oh, it's from the stove. He was like, really? She's like, yeah. And then they proceed to have like real kinky sex, the mask and everything, still having the gags from last episode. So she gags Andy, puts a mask on him. At first I was like, well, that kind of makes sense because you ain't really into it. But then it's like kind of rough, and you're like, okay. And then we proceed to have like whatever the hell that is from the bed drip down and like burn through like the floor, and it keeps going and going and going. And I'm like, that ended up not being dealt with the entire episode. I'm like, what the hell was that even about then? Maybe that's going to be a future storyline we have to deal with, because I'm like, maybe that's supposed to like represent like there's something in her bed like that's kind of adding to the evil. Maybe that's what that's kind of like. Maybe, like I said, maybe it's just a later storyline thing. I don't know, but yeah. It was even awkward when like her oldest daughter's like mom and catches her wearing like the tiger mask, and then she just roars like and scares her daughter away. But I'm like, oh, that's weird, because it's like, once again, and you just see over the course of the episode, Kristen's behavior is like, takes a major swerve. Like, granted, she's changed behaviorally, like behavior-wise, like over the course of this season, obviously ever since she killed LaRue, but it's like, it's even more so like in this episode. I feel like that swerve, like I said, it was a subtle swerve. This is the most like swerve I feel like we've seen so far. It was just her personality. Like, she's just so like annoyed all the time. Like, the guy getting in front of her, in the moment she's like, all right, like step into him, and then she walks on. I'm like, what's she gonna do? And then she gets like some stuff from the frozen aisle. I'm like, are you gonna like hit him and then give him that to kind of deal with his black eye? She kind of smacks him with it and then trips him and then throw it down, and it's like, yeah, we're not gonna need a bag. Andy and Andy's sitting there like, what the hell? Like, why have you gotten so aggressive? Because it's even being like she's super impatient and stuff like that. It's like, wow. So, an interesting episode for all that to kind of come out, because obviously this episode kind of deals with like the brain structure and stuff like that, because what they're investigating is this device that's used to map out brains and stuff. Obviously, Ben, being who he is, like, he's kind of studied in this area and stuff like that, so he's more well versed on what this is all about. But essentially, this device has kind of awakened, like, some of the people afterwards have kind of had some kind of spiritual experience that they become religious afterwards. So basically, the church wants to investigate to see if this is something that could be applicable to potentially getting people to become more practitioners, to become kind of like, could it be something that can be used, to strengthen faith, is kind of what the whole point of it is. Or at least kind of instill faith in people who might not really have that big of baseline for faith. So after interviewing a couple people, they find out like, right, everyone kind of had varying experience. I mean, the one dude was like, honestly, it was beautiful. I don't know how to put it. So Ben being, because I love the whole conversation between like, it's the typical debate between Kristen and David about like, okay, like, David's coming from the perspective of that basically these people found a spiritualness that is that has helped them out of their depression, whereas Kristen is saying like, no, a certain part of their brains were triggered that alleviated the depression that then just they attribute to it being spiritual. She's saying like, that's typically the thing, and Ben's kind of like, all right, doctor, okay, father, kind of going between them, and he decides to be the first one up. And immediately I was like, I knew he was going to have like an interesting experience. It was interesting too, because like we hard cut to like, we turn the camera to him and he's crying and everything, but then he's immediately like, no, what was that? What's wrong? Like, oh, like, you know, he's fine and everything, at least claiming to be. And then he proceeds to see his mom. Now that was a really interesting insight, because we've only got little hints here and there over the course of this series about Ben and his complicated religious situation with his family, because his father's a devout person, and it's still the whole, it seems like his sister is too, maybe not nearly as much as their father, but it is still kind of the thing of he's kind of the black sheep of the family, being the atheist that he is. And so his mom coming to him being like, I told you to kind of well verse yourself into science but not turn your back on Allah. And he was like, I'm kind of became the person I have because of you. I wonder, is it because she opened up his mind to science and stuff that suggested that it changed his worldview and that's where he kind of lost the religion? Or was it losing his mom that made him go like, yeah, screw this, you know? Because that can, like, I think shake a person's faith, where it's like when you lose someone that you care about, especially like a parent like that. But I like the mother-son relationship, like even just that little time we get to spend with it, just it being like, oh, like she calling him like a smart, like you know, calling him out for being so smart and stubborn. I forgot what it was exactly that he said, but she was kind of like, yeah, that's such a, you know, I expect such a smart response from you because you're so stubborn. But then she's like, right, what did I teach you? Like, watch the feet of, like, you know, like the prostitutes that were there. And there was one where they were walking backwards, but their feet were pointing forward. And it turns out like it was like a ghost or a spirit or something like that. And it scared the crap out of them. Because it turns out not everyone who's done this has had a positive. It's mainly positive, but there's still a subsection of people who, instead of seeing heaven, basically saw hell. Which, you know, Kristen's immediately kind of like, that ain't what that is. Like, you know, it's, you know. But David's perspective on it is that. And this show does what it does so well. It does the whole thing of like making you question what is real and what isn't. Like the fact is, the whole Kristen one was such a trip, because at first, like, Kristen's like, what? Like, I don't have a soul or something? And she looks down at her shoe, and then she kind of like tosses her shoe to kind of, with the loose, like, strap. And so David's like, no, I'll go. She's like, no, you don't have to. He's like, no, I want to go. And then he proceeds to have a vision of her killing LaRoe, and it's like, oh, what did you see? And he's like, I saw you killing LaRoe. And he got the details about the climax and everything. Immediately went to Kirk, because she's like, how do I handle this? It's like, at first Kirk's trying to appease her, being like, no, what this most likely is. And at first I'm like, is this actually her? Is she in the Matrix? Is she like, are we incepting this where it seems like she's awake when in actuality she's under? And it turns out to be the case. But I love how trippy that was, because now it's like, the biggest concern for her was like, she knows on some level Ben knows, but that doesn't shake her as much as David knowing. So I think that was so interesting, because basically it's like, okay, Kurt's like, right, he's probably like, he saw LaRue in the news and he knows you have a climax and he's kind of noticed your behavior being a little different. So he kind of put two and two together is all he was suggesting. He was saying like, right, so this is just your brain manifesting essentially your guilt. So maybe you should confide in David, not from a spiritual standpoint, but you know, go to someone that you believe to be morally, you know, a good person, to like confide, you know, and do a pseudo confession towards. And so she goes to see David, but then like Leland ripped off his arm or cut off his arm and is eating it. And then she wakes up and she's like, wait, didn't you go before? It's like, no, that was all in your head. It's like, wait, what? She went to the whole like Leland part. You left out the whole part about, yeah, Leland was eating your arm. We're going to completely ignore that. But also she made sure to skip over, like, she's like, yeah, I had a vision of, it's like, oh, what did you, it's like, yeah, it's, no. It was a vision of you seeing something. It's like, what did I see? It's kind of like, skip over that. So it's like, that was interesting. But I also do love that, I'm like, because when the David thing happened, I was like, okay, so what's David going to see? It's like, oh, he saw nothing. I was like, oh, I was waiting for the Shyamalan twist. I've been saying that a lot lately. You know, that's always been a thing for years. But like, I've never used the term Shyamalan twist until recently. It was like the most recent episode. No, it was not last week's, the episode 3 of What If. That's when I actually used that in my review. I've never used the word Shyamalan twist. You know, what he twist. Damn you, robot chicken. But nevertheless, I think that's just a natural colloquialism, and that I always struggle saying that word. I need to start trying to seem smart using big words all the time. At least attempting to say big words. Don't say them unless I can say them without stumbling through them. But I was waiting for the twist of like, okay, what's David's? It's like, oh no, this is all real. And even being like, right, the two non-believers end up not being the ones who had the visions, and the believer is the one that doesn't have the vision. Because that was the thing too, like, you know, I'm an atheist, you're agnostic, like what we saw, but what does a believer see? And ironically enough, he saw nothing. And the sister ended up telling him like, oh, it's because like she's like, you shouldn't, machinery will rewire your brain. Because for him, because obviously he was struggling with kind of praying in the silence last episode, but she was telling him to meditate more this episode because it's like we need to arm ourselves against Leland. But it's like he tried to use a machine to kind of force a vision and force it, but now it's like now he has to start from scratch. All the work he had built up, like all that was kind of done. It's like the sequel to a video game. It's like, oops, all those abilities you had last game, they're going from Kingdom Hearts 1 to 2. Because it's like, oh, Sora was in a deep year sleep, so he lost every ability. I mean, granted, you can also go from like Chain of Memories to be like, oh yeah, all your abilities were stolen and you were turned into cards, so on and so forth. You get what I'm trying to make, like your typical video game reasoning for why you have to start over. So it's almost like that, interestingly enough. I actually was reading something recently that went into that. There's a manhwa I'm reading called Dice. It's a really good series. I highly recommend you check it out. It's you can find it on the Webtoon app. Spoilers, a character has to start from scratch. Not always, not all the way, but it's like 97%. But it's a whole interesting thing. So that's kind of fresh in my mind as an example of that as well. But regardless, I think it's so interesting that ended up being the aftermath of that. Like I said, I just kept explaining. I was like, where's the twist? Where's the twist? Never came. Which, speaking of the sister, oh, like the moment someone came in and threw dirt on the floor, I was like, oh, it's that piece of crap, Leland. We ain't seen you in a hot minute. And it's like, yeah, because in that moment I was like, right, I remember the last time we saw you. You got burned really bad. And like that sister, she's calm as a cucumber. He's like, yeah, why haven't I seen you? She's like, yeah, because basically like the church keeps me in the back because I'm a nun. So of course, like you're not going to like see me or know me. But Leland took a real interest in her. Like he had like, it's like, oh, you burned me with your holy water. And she's like, yeah, during your quote-unquote exorcism. I'm like, I love it. She's like, you got jokes, I got jokes back. I'm like, I love it. She's easily the MVP of this season, dude. I love it. Like, and especially because they give her to you in such small doses. Like, she's never had like a full episode to herself. Like, she's always here and there. It's never like a lot that you get to see her. And I think that's what makes her so intriguing, because she's such an enigma. Because she's not like anyone else at the church. And I think that's, interestingly enough, why Leland took an interest in her, because he had the bottle ready, and then he's like, hold out your hand. She's like, okay. I thought what was going to be the thing is he was going to mess with her to see whether she does. And I thought she was actually going to hold out her hand and be like, yeah, I'm ready for you. But it's like, no, she was like, I'm ready for you another way. Pulled out a freaking knife, and he's looking like, huh. And it's just kind of like, he's like, oh, like basically trying to convince her, like, hey, you don't, why spend so much time devoting yourself to God? Like, me, here on earth, I own you. So basically, you come to me. The devil gives you a lot more, essentially. And she's like, well, you know where to find me. I'm like, yo, I love her so much, dude. And as he's walking away, it's like, yeah, nuns need to get more respect. I mean, he's like, they're kind of sexy. I was like, because even I was kind of looking as he was walking, I was like, he looked like he was kind of like, yo, that was hot. I was like, I think he walked away with a heart on, dude. I'm like, wow, he's really into it. He's like, yeah, nuns are kind of sexy. Which I think is so interesting. Oh, he's really got. I think it's probably the thing of like, because she isn't so godly, she isn't above like, oh, like faking like the burn of like holy water, like she did. Like the fact is, like I said, she's an enigma. So it's just interesting because it's like she's okay playing that lane of gray, but she wants to keep David more up and up, because it's like, right, your power, your connection, your visions to God, like they're going to be necessary for us in this fight to come. So that's interesting. Andy found all those like papers from Kristen, and it's like mapping out houses and stuff. I was like, why would you have more than one of those? Like, I was like, could that be connected to Laurel? And it still got that red journal, interestingly enough. She took it from the girls, but I guess she just decided to keep it herself. keep one for herself. But that's interesting. But like the maps and everything, I was like, why do you have multiples? Like, were you planning multiple? I didn't pay as much close attention, but it's like, it turns out it's different houses, because she says, like, anytime someone annoys her, like, her therapy session involves her basically mapping out their house. It's like, I'm not trying to actually come, but I'm like, is that why you did you have to? Because I was about to say, like, the LaRoe thing was like spur of the moment. That doesn't mean she didn't already have it planned out. So that's why she probably was able to jump to it so quickly. It's like, no, which once again kind of makes it more premeditated, but it doesn't seem like it. I feel like that would have come up during her session with Kurt about it, which, well, I'll finish this thought process first before I get to that, because I forgot to talk about the aftermath of Kristen's situation. But I just thought that was interesting the moment he found those maps and everything, and I'm like, huh. Because I thought he was going to find something else, but I'm like, no, there's nothing else at the house that would be, like, mega suspicious for him to find. Because I was like, would there be anything that because she hasn't done anything. Like, yeah, she went flirting with those guys a couple episodes ago, but nothing ever happened. So I was like, it's not like there's any, like, affair going on. But, well, that actually kind of ties back into the Kristen and Kurt thing, which I'll circle back to, which I love that she's like, right, I had this vision, and you gave me this advice. And he was like, honestly, I would not give you that advice to, like, confide in David, like, as a confessional sense. But he's like, it is interesting that you would think that I would have that approach. And she's like, this is like a house of mirrors. I need you to unpack that. He's basically saying, like, right, like, anytime we're in our therapy sessions, you're always talking about David. Your husband just came back after 2 months. You ain't mentioned him once. And she's like, yeah, it's like, well, you know, maybe this is kind of a sign of, you know, your own happiness or whatever. Because, like, that whole thing was about brain things supposed to bring you joy and stuff like that. So I thought that would shift things a little bit for Kristen. Like, obviously, like, her joy meter's a little wonky right now. But essentially, it's like, right, if your husband's your husband, that's fine. But then, like, David is David. So, like, you know, insinuating, like, maybe there's more to it. But she's like, maybe it doesn't just have to be, why does it have to be about a man? He's like, right, maybe it's a representation of being with Andy is kind of like the day-to-day mundane aspects of, like, your life. Whereas David's like, associate with this interesting job that you have, this new challenge all the time, you know? Because even she was saying that at the market when she was with, Andy about, like, right, we used to be the people that kind of did whatever we want. We were a little reckless and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, but we're older now. We have families. So, like, a lot of that responsibility kind of takes a little bit more precedence. So, like, kind of giving into your wilder instincts, your darker side. I mean, Cheryl literally went through it last season, kind of, you know, kind of going to her kind of reckless abandonment last episode. Like, Kristen's kind of going through that phase a little bit now, too. I think it's because she's always been the more responsible one, especially more recently when she ended up giving up climbing to just be the mom at home. Yeah, she's working a job and she's handling the parenting by herself most of the time, so she's juggling so much. So there's that. But then Kristen has suggested that maybe at the end of the day, what she sees in David is just the interest of, like, the attraction of having something you can't have because he's about to become a priest. But then Kurt's like, but maybe maybe what David represents is a challenge. And she's like, how so? He's like, well, if he doesn't become a priest, he is no longer unattainable. I was like, ooh, getting into the psychology of it. It's like, that's actually really fascinating. Understanding like what that, interpreting stuff like that, because I think that's all that really is interpretation. It's not like a foolproof thing. It's just kind of guesswork of, like, it could mean this, it could mean that, you know. And I just think that's so fascinating. And even Kristen's almost kind of like, kind of taken aback by that thought, you know. So I thought that was so fascinating. I didn't talk about Ben's aftermath either. I'm a little all over the place. I do apologize. But for him, it's like, he ended up calling his sister, being like, yeah, was mom disappointed? She's like, why are you calling me in the middle of the night? Like, mom was disappointed in everyone that wasn't her. But he was like, yeah, but, like, when I kind of basically turned my back on religion, like, was that, like, you know, was she disappointed and stuff like that? She's like, bro, I'm going. Like, the fact is that that's there in his mind. Like, because even at the end of it all, like, it's like, cool, the conversations about, like, what should we, because I think his experience with the sister saying, like, don't use machinery to change your mind, David has the perspective of no, don't use, like, that the church shouldn't adopt this type of thing. And then Kristen's kind of like, yeah. And then you have Ben being like, maybe. So it's kind of like, cool. I'll look into it and find out whether they're like, I'll make my own decision based on like your each one of you, like, perspective use. I don't know how I said each one of your perspectives in this whole situation. So that was quite fascinating. You had Andy not confronting, but asking Cheryl about it. And I love that he's constantly looking at the doll like, what the, that creepy ass doll in here. And then like even at one point Cheryl turns to it and he's like, Cheryl? And she's like, huh? And then she starts giggling. I'm like, man. Kristen and Cheryl are both a little weird, dude. And even Andy, because he's like, why is she changed? It's like, oh, she's changed because she adapted, Andy. You're the one that went off. You're supposed to be gone a few weeks, and you were gone 2 months. He's like, yeah, but I'm back now. But it's like, no. Like, she's the one that kind of had to, like, hold down the fort. You're just mad because she had to adapt without you. She's been working a job, paying the bills, like, doing all this. Because him is, like, it's not my fault that, the economy had the situation it did. We lost, like, 10 clients and everything. So, like, I had to stay longer to kind of compensate for that. But now he's suggesting to her, like, cool, we're gonna sell the climbing business, and then like I'm gonna get a job, like a 9 to 5 here. Even suggests, she's like, wait, you're gonna get this? He's like, no, I'm gonna get like a higher level entry, not like a lower sales job. It's like, no, I'm gonna get like a corporate aspect of the business, because yeah, I got people who could, I'm like, first and foremost, you're throwing it out there like it's a guarantee that you'll get like a higher level position in this job. But he's also saying like, yeah, you should quit your job and then write that book you always wanted to. It's like, first and foremost, like, it's kind of effed up for you to kind of like, you should do this and do that. It's like, I mean, I get it, there's suggestions, but it's like, it feels more like you saying this is what we're doing rather than this is what we should do. It comes off that way. But it's also because, like, he's talking about how much she's changed and everything, and he thinks this job is at the core of it. But for her, it's like, fine, we sell the business, cool, you get that job, and then we'll revisit this situation. But why should I have to quit my job? But it's like, right, I found these maps, and one of our daughters was like, oh yeah, like, that's how you map out killing someone. And she's like, yeah, that's just part of my therapy session. And she wants to talk to her daughter. It's like, no, she's okay. I told her that sometimes parents do stuff that, just for pretend. Which I think is kind of ironic, those words coming out of his mouth, because Kristen's kind of pretending around him right now. Especially when we get a sneak preview of like, oh, it's not just regular, like, I thought she's like, putting it across to her skin and burning herself. Yes, but it's because she's heating it up on a stove and burning herself. Because even during the sexy time, she was asking him to touch those marks, and like, she was getting off to it. It's like, oh, thin line between pleasure and pain, huh? Like, it's like, wow, that's kind of her thing. Like, I guess I kind of look at it almost like, I'm not well versed in the movies, but it's like the Da Vinci Code thing. Isn't it Ray Fiennes who's the one that does that? Or is that his character, I believe? The one who does the whipping himself thing, like, that's the thing that, I mean, when it comes to religious stuff like that, like, I'm not well versed in the movie. I don't think I've ever seen that movie all the way through, but I will always, like I said, I think that's from the Da Vinci Code. I will always think of that, like, kind of that religious, like, whipping and flailing of yourself. But I'm like, interesting that I'm like, is it because she's not feeling much lately and she needs to feel like that's the only way she can feel joy, is to kind of feel that pain that, like, her job kind of gives her that excitement, but home doesn't anymore. Home is more annoying than anything else. Don't know. That was just quite an interesting reveal at the end of the episode, knowing that she's heating them up on the stove and burning herself. So it's only going to be a matter of time before, like, Andy or the kids catches her doing that. And that's going to be an awkward situation. But it's like, where all of this is going to take us going forward into the next episode is going to be really fascinating. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.